Today, it is almost impossible to imagine modern life without oil. Cars, airplanes, ships, factories, machines, and countless everyday products depend on petroleum in one way or another. But thousands of years ago, humans had no idea what oil really was. So, how did humans discover oil in the first place? How did a mysterious black liquid leaking from the ground become the fuel that powered cars, factories, airplanes, and entire economies? And how did this one resource become powerful enough to influence wars, politics, and the future of the world? Stay with me until the end, because the story of oil is far more surprising than you might think. At first, they simply saw a strange, dark, sticky substance rising naturally from the ground. And nobody could have imagined that this mysterious liquid would one day influence economies, wars, politics, and the entire modern world. The story begins not with modern oil wells, but with places where oil naturally reached the surface. In ancient Mesopotamia, people discovered natural bitumen seeping from the ground. It was thick, sticky, and remarkably resistant to water. Humans quickly discovered practical ways to use it. They coated wooden boats with it to prevent water from entering. They also used it in construction, placing it between bricks and stones to make structures more resistant to moisture. At that time, oil was not a major source of energy. It was simply a useful natural material, but humans were only beginning to discover its potential. Thousands of miles away, ancient Chinese engineers were experimenting with something even more remarkable. They learned how to reach underground deposits using early drilling techniques. Long bamboo pipes were pushed deep into the ground to access natural gas, and, in some areas, petroleum. It is astonishing to realize that people were exploring underground energy resources thousands of years before the modern petroleum industry existed. But there was one major problem. They could not extract oil on a large scale. Then the world began to change. During the Industrial Revolution, factories expanded rapidly. Cities grew, machines became more common, and the demand for energy increased dramatically. At night, people needed reliable sources of light. For a long time, materials such as whale oil, animal fats, and coal-based fuels were used. But many of these resources were expensive, difficult to obtain, or limited. Then scientists and entrepreneurs began looking more seriously at crude oil. The problem was that crude oil could not simply be used in its natural form for every purpose. It had to be processed. Through refining, useful products such as kerosene could be separated from crude oil. Suddenly, the strange black liquid coming from the ground had enormous commercial potential. But one question remained. If oil was so valuable, how could humans extract it from deep underground? Then came the year 1859. In Pennsylvania, a team led by Edwin Drake successfully drilled a well that proved oil could be extracted systematically from beneath the ground. The well reached only about 69 feet deep, but its importance was enormous. For the first time, large-scale commercial oil production appeared possible. And what followed was almost a race. People rushed to Pennsylvania looking for oil. Companies were created. Land prices increased. Drilling towers appeared across the landscape. Places that had once been quiet farmland suddenly became centers of oil production. But the industry soon learned an important lesson. Finding oil was only the beginning. Oil had to be transported. It had to be refined. It had to be stored. And most importantly, it had to be sold. That was when petroleum began transforming from a natural resource into a global industry. One man understood this better than almost anyone else. His name was John D. Rockefeller. While many people were focused on finding new oil wells, Rockefeller looked at the bigger picture. He realized that enormous power could come from controlling the refining and distribution of oil. His company, Standard Oil, expanded rapidly. It became one of the most powerful businesses in America and gained enormous influence over the petroleum industry. But then another invention appeared, and it completely changed the future of oil: the automobile. During the late 19th century, engineers developed increasingly practical internal combustion engines. At first, automobiles were expensive machines available mainly to wealthy customers. Then came mass production. Henry Ford helped transform the automobile from a luxury into a product that ordinary people could increasingly afford. As millions of vehicles appeared on roads, the demand for gasoline exploded. Oil was no longer mainly about lighting lamps. It was becoming the fuel of transportation. Cars were followed by trucks, then buses, then tractors, and eventually aircraft. By the 20th century, petroleum had become one of the foundations of modern industrial civilization. But another major transformation was taking place far from the American oil fields. The Middle East. Large petroleum deposits were discovered in countries such as Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and eventually Saudi Arabia. These discoveries changed the economic future of the region forever. In Saudi Arabia, enormous reserves beneath the desert transformed the country into one of the world's most important energy producers. And with oil came something else: power. Countries with large petroleum reserves controlled a resource that modern industries desperately needed. In 1960, several major oil-producing countries came together to form OPEC. Their goal was to increase cooperation among oil-producing nations and strengthen their influence over petroleum production and pricing. Then came 1973. A major conflict erupted in the Middle East. Several Arab oil-producing nations restricted oil supplies to countries supporting Israel. The consequences were felt across the world. Oil prices surged. Fuel shortages appeared. Drivers waited in long lines at gas stations. Businesses faced higher costs. Inflation increased, and the world discovered something it had never fully understood before. Modern civilization had become deeply dependent on petroleum. If the supply of oil was disrupted, the effects could spread through the entire global economy. And oil is much more than gasoline. Petroleum is used to produce plastics, chemicals, synthetic materials, lubricants, industrial products, and countless other things surrounding us every day. In many ways, oil became hidden inside modern civilization itself. But now, the story is entering another chapter. The same resource that helped accelerate industrial development is also connected to major environmental challenges, including greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Because of this, countries around the world are investing heavily in alternatives. Solar power, wind energy, electric vehicles, batteries, nuclear energy, and other emerging technologies. But this does not mean oil will suddenly disappear. Its role may change, its demand may change, and the world may gradually depend less on it. But the story of oil is far from over. Thousands of years ago, humans saw a mysterious black substance leaking from the ground. They didn't understand where it came from. They didn't know how it formed. And they certainly didn't know what it would eventually become. They used it to protect boats. They used it in buildings. They later turned it into fuel. Then they drilled deep into the earth to find more of it. Oil gave humanity speed. It powered factories, connected cities, transformed transportation, created enormous fortunes, changed international politics, and helped build the modern world. But perhaps the greatest lesson of oil is not about the resource itself. It is about human dependence. A natural resource can become a source of incredible progress. But when an entire civilization becomes dependent on one resource, that strength can also become a weakness. For more than a century, oil helped write the story of modern civilization. Now the world is beginning to write the next chapter. And someday, people may look back at our era and say, there was a time when the world ran on a black liquid hidden beneath the earth.